Hey everybody, it's Aaron here with Robert, and welcome to Get Your Geek on review of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Just dropped yesterday. But whenever this thing came out, it dropped before this,
Yeah,
obviously.
we're here. It dropped this past weekend.
Yeah.
And so we are going to talk about it. We are going to talk about non-spoilers first. We'll get into spoilers. But just, the Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, we went through some hell to get here. Because long time ago, James Gunn got fired off of this movie for some really old tweets that he acknowledged were in poor taste and were offensive, and he'd already apologized for them even before he made the first Guardians movie. But they came out sometime after the second Guardians movie. They came out again. It resurfaced. He ended up getting fired, and then the entire cast basically said we're not coming back unless James Gunn comes back. And there were a lot of different things that went through it. James Gunn, did the apology tour again. He went off and worked on other stuff. He worked on DC. He did like the Suicide Squad. And while he was working on that, I think Kevin Feige, who'd pretty much always been in his corner about this, seemed to convince his bosses at Disney to bring James Gunn back. So we got him back. We got this movie made. The script is generally the same, but I think it had to incorporate a couple other elements just because the movie came out later in the timeline than maybe they expected it to. And so I think you can see a little bit of that. But ultimately, we got the movie James Gunn wanted to make with the cast he wanted to make. It's all of our familiar faces that we've seen before. We do have a couple of new characters, of course, the two primary ones being the High Evolutionary and Adam Warlock. And so we will get into those characters. But, just initial thoughts, Aaron, on Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. We saw it last night.
Yes.
So you've been stewing on it for now 12 hours, some of which I
Yes.
presume you've been asleep for.
I mean, you would think I'd be asleep, but I
I
don't
presume.
sleep.
But
Um,
what are you thinking?
this originally, sitting in the theater, I loved the movie. Like I was excited for everything. I was happy for it. I was overall just happy. But then again, like you said, when you have that time to sit and think, it's like, okay, there's some weak points. Like you said, maybe it was because of some of the writing, and maybe that's what I was picking up on. But I agree that there are problems with it, and we'll get into that part. But overall, I thought this was a very strong film. I thought it was good. We got pretty much a good amount of time with every character that I wanted to see. I think, when it comes to the Guardians themselves,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, it's not really a spoiler, I would say, but I mean, they're trying to save one of their comrades. I'll say it that way. And that's the point of the film is family. It's almost like it's Fast and the Furious, but in outer space. Family.
Vin Diesel's in both.
He is in both. And I really think when he says I am Groot, he really means family. And
All
that's
right.
all it is. So I think really this film did a great job of like going over a lot. But I also feel there was times where it skimmed over some stuff where I'm like, I kind of want a little bit more of certain things to have been played out. And
Okay.
unfortunately, we didn't get that. But we'll go into that in a minute. But what about you? Like, what did you feel, watching in the theater in a bed almost, by the way, because we were in the front row and the
Yeah,
way
it
this
was
theater set
weird.
up, it's like a bed. And
Yeah,
I
it
looked at
was
my friend, I
giant
brought,
recliners.
yeah, look at my friend, and our first thing was like, I was like, I promise you, I'm not trying to get you anywhere. I swear I didn't know this is how like close we were gonna be. I
Uh-huh.
promise.
Uh-huh.
So
Yeah, no, it was that was an interesting experience. But no, for me, I think that even while I was watching it and even after my initial kind of feelings, it was like this is a solid, really well-made movie that I think I will enjoy on rewatches more than I enjoyed the first time.
right. I
Um,
can see that.
I think that James Gunn for me has always been about heart and humor. Those are the two things that and like this is where for me like the first Guardians movie, heart and humor are top tier.
Hmm.
And then Guardians 2, it felt like the heart was still there, the humor didn't work for me, right? And that's why for that movie, like it really suffered because there are long stretches of that movie where they're making jokes that just do not work for me. And that definitely drags down my enjoyment of it. This one, I felt like the humor was really good. I was pretty much laughing at all the jokes. I appreciated like there were some running jokes that I appreciated and I thought paid off well. I will say the one thing that fell a little bit short. It wasn't bad. It wasn't like for me the level of humor in Guardians 2 was bad.
Right.
The heart and the emotion of this film isn't bad. It just didn't rise to the level I was expecting it to based on the previous two movies. It didn't.
Right.
I didn't tear up at all in this movie, and generally I like in the first two Guardians movies I did. Like there are some strong emotional beats in those movies that do make me tear up. This one I didn't have any of that. There's definitely some emotional story beats, but I think that the way that they were told caused me to not have the same reaction. Because I think the biggest emotional story is the flashback story.
Yeah.
And you kind of already knew how that was going to end, right?
Right.
And so it was kind of one of those like when it has the tragic ending, and I'm not spoiling anything
Right.
because clearly that's what it's setting up to. It was
Right.
like I know that's coming, and so it didn't hit hard as I think it maybe could or should have because it was like, I already knew it was going to that tragic place. So with that being said, I do think that this is a really fitting conclusion for pretty much every one of our Guardians characters. I like the way that it builds to where it ends, and there's definitely something that I want to talk about in spoilers because
Right.
it caught me completely off guard just based on what my expectations were, and I was so happy with it. It was a moment where I was like, oh, like that is totally not what I thought they were going to do, but I'm so
Right.
glad they did. So
Okay.
I think we will definitely talk about that as we move forward. But ultimately, yeah, I mean, this is another fun Guardians adventure. The stakes are definitely smaller than we've seen in the other movies
Yeah.
in terms of like they're not saving the galaxy like they had to do in the first two movies. Like in the first movie, they had to stop Ronan from destroying an entire planet. And if he destroyed that planet, it's probably going to keep going and destroying other planets, right? So they had to stop that threat. And in the second one, they had to stop Ego, who was literally trying to take over the entire world or the entire galaxy. Like they had to stop him.
Right.
In this one, it's like we're trying to save our friend, and so we have to
But that
go
is their
go to
world.
people. No, 100%. Like
I know. I'm playing.
I thought that the lowering of stakes from a broad aspect really made them much more personal, right? These are
It
very
did.
personal stakes, and I really liked it. So I think this was a solid movie, and I do think that watching it in future iterations where I'm not maybe I already know what to expect, I think that I will end up appreciating the ride a little bit more than I did.
I think so too. I think my thing is this is our first watch, right? Like we watched it, we enjoyed it, we had fun with it.
Mhm.
There are again, not going to go into spoilers just yet, but there's tons and tons of Easter eggs in it. I mean, and some of them are right in your face. If you know comic books, they're right sitting right in front of you.
Oh, it's not just
Other of
comic
them,
books. I mean, there is
I
a
was leading to
call out to
that.
Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel in
Yes.
this
Well,
movie.
I mean, there is also the one thing that people have been wanting since Guardians of Galaxy 1, Volume 1 or whatever, with a certain actor that came out and actually had more than just a line in the film. And
Sure.
we actually got
Yeah.
to see him.
He's in the previews. I think we can
Was he
say
in the previews? I couldn't remember.
yes. I think
Okay.
we can say the actor's name. I
That
think we can
Nathan
say
Fillion is
Nathan Fillion
officially in
gets
Guardians of the
about
Galaxy.
5 to 10 minutes of screen time in this movie,
He got a good amount and a
and
lot
a
of
couple a
dialogue.
couple of good dialogue scenes too.
Yeah,
Like
I
I
know.
liked the dynamic of him, and like he had two different like yeah I've got an idiot on my team too. And it was like
That's true. I know this guy. I love this guy. Like he's so. I love you. I mean, it was just
oh.
his whole thing, and I was happy for that. But we got
Yeah.
stuff like that, and then
Mhm.
we have in the spoilers. I'll talk a little bit about it. We have some very hidden gems that, unless you're a comic fan, you wouldn't really pick it up right away. And I think that this is a good thing. The way we all know what's going to kind of happen at the end of this film. I kind of knew what was coming because I don't believe James Gunn's coming back after this. I don't believe. I think Batista's even said a couple times he was kind of
Yeah.
out, done.
No, Gunn is
Uh,
done. Batista is done. Zoe Saldana has said she's done, although I think that certainly the door is open for her to return.
right.
Um, you know,
I can't
I
remember Mantis, what her name
yeah,
is.
Palm Clementieff.
Thank you.
I don't think she said anything. I think it's mostly been Gunn and Batista that have been the most vocal
Yeah.
about, they're done. They see this as the end of their trilogy and the end of their time. Um,
Which,
and I think that, I think that makes a lot of sense. And obviously, Gunn's got a lot going on now,
right.
with being over at DC. And I think Batista, at the age he is, to keep playing this very physical character, would continue to present challenges if
It
he
would.
was doing that. So I think it makes sense. And yeah, I mean, as I said before, I think the character arcs for all of these uh all of our guardians really, we are seeing from the first Guardians to the second Guardians, into Infinity War Endgame, and then the holiday special. I think this is a fitting conclusion
Excuse me.
for all of them, really. Like we see, whether it's Star Lord, and we see kind of his full circle journey, or it's somebody like Kraglin, who has been kind of a bit player in all the
Right.
movies. He's shown up a little bit at the end of Guardians 2. We got a little bit more with him, where like he was officially joining the team, and we get kind of a nice little moment with him,
Right.
as we go through this. So I just
Uh,
felt like they did a good job of closing arcs. Now, some of them were more fleshed out than others and
right.
more satisfying than others, but I think ultimately they gave us good, satisfying conclusions for all of these characters.
And I think so. And again, this is where it comes back to I feel like for the most part, all of them had a good screen time. Like everybody that needed that good amount of time got what they needed,
Yeah.
whether it comes to, someone like him or someone like Star-Lord or even just Gamora getting a little bit more of what's going on in her world because
Mhm.
like we've said, this isn't the same Gamora that we had at the end of Avengers, the first Avengers. Yeah,
Well, I
right.
mean,
That's when she died.
in Infinity War,
Yeah,
she
Infinity
yeah,
Wars. Yeah,
that's when we lose her, and then we get her back in Endgame, but it is a different version. It is the version before she betrayed Ronan and met Peter Quill, right?
exactly.
And so that person is in there, but she hasn't got there on her journey yet. That
Right,
she's, kind of this, because when we meet her in the first Guardians, like, and really meet her, not just the, oh, she's this assassin, but like when we actually get to meet her in the prison and we start hearing her, like she is someone who is clearly, wants to help people. That is her
right,
motivation. She's going to try and help people. She's the one that's like, we can't just turn this stone over, we can't just sell this to the highest bidder, like we have to protect this because it will be used to kill people.
right,
And that is her character, and we see that throughout that journey of then Guardians 2 and into Infinity War. Is she's constantly at that point where she's like, this is bigger than me. This is bigger than us. We have to help people. And this version isn't quite there yet, right? She's
right,
still kind of in it for herself, trying to, yeah, she's not like a bad person, but she's also, like she's willing to cross some lines that the
right,
previous Gamora wouldn't have. And that's a
right,
great, I think it's a great dynamic for when she is hooked up with our guardians who have worked with a Gamora who, is a completely different person.
right,
And we keep getting that call out, like, like the old Gamora would have never done this, like, or whatever. And it's like, I thought that worked. Like
right.
it was a interesting kind of component to this movie.
It was, it's interesting because you get some interesting storytelling when you do that because you have you say they were what 5 years or however many years together because I don't know if they ever give us a time frame between the first film and when she dies, but say we got like a couple years at least.
Yeah, no,
You
I
know,
think it is supposed to be, because I think the first one officially takes place in 2014, because we have the 1988 is when he gets
Oh, that's
like
right.
abducted, and then they say like 26 years later. So it is
Okay.
specifically in 2014, and we know the events of Infinity War take place in like 2018.
So
So
yeah,
we
four
had like
years.
we have a solid 4 years
And
in there. Yeah.
it's interesting because again, you get like what Peter's gone through with her for 4 years and falling in love with her, and not just like the little bits you see in here, but like you assume for those 4 years they had other adventures, been romantic or dates or whatever. And
Sure.
it's like someone with all that knowledge, and then you have someone who's literally just a blank slate. I don't know what the heck you're talking about. That doesn't sound like me. I would never do that. But then as her growth, I think we had a good amount of growth from her in that film. There's a parts I didn't like with it
Yeah.
still, but we did get some growth with the character. Um, and again, spoiler territories where I can go a little bit more in depth with that. But again, I think everybody was great in this film. I think she did a great job. I think Peter bounced off of it really well. And then I know how you said you were a little bit indifferent about the humor on this one than the others. I actually
No,
enjoyed.
I like
Oh,
the
I thought
humor
you
in
were
this one.
indifferent because
No,
you
no,
were.
no, no, no. Yeah,
Okay,
no,
I misunderstood.
yeah, volume two humor does not work for me. I thought this was a return to form. I thought the
Oh, okay,
humor
my
was
bad.
really good in this movie.
I got backwards. Yeah, like I loved it. There and some of the subtle jokes, like I noticed me and my friend were cracking up a couple times, and I'm like, okay, like those subtle ones are kind of hitting too. So overall,
Yeah.
like I think again, it was good. It was really
All
good.
right, before we get into spoilers, let's just talk
Yes.
about our big bad villain, the High Evolutionary,
Yeah.
and then our big main character whose antagonists, and if you know the origin of the character, he probably doesn't stay that way the whole time,
Yes.
which is Adam Warlock.
Yep.
But he was created initially at the end of Guardians 2 as kind
Right.
of an antagonist for the Guardians, and we do see him. He gets some into some punch 'em ups with our Guardians. So, what are your feelings on the High Evolutionary and Adam Warlock? Did you like it? What didn't you like?
So
All that stuff.
again, I have that comic book knowledge and background, which screws me sometimes, a lot of times.
Yeah.
So in this one, I love Adam Warlock in the comics, but his
Mhm.
arcs or stories, or I don't know how you want to say it, they're like all over the place. I mean, we have stories where he's like the brother of Thanos. You have stories where he was created not by the High Evolutionary, but another group of people, kind of like in this one, the Sovereigns, but they have a different name in the comics. I can't remember. They
Mhm.
made him. He turned on them, went back in a cocoon. Then he's like, I'm going to come back like in another planet because Earth sucks. And then he gets thrown back on Earth in his cocoon, comes back. He's like, I'm still on Earth. This sucks. I'm going back in my, and he keeps going back in a cocoon. That's kind of what
Right.
his thing it is.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and it's one of those, what's the word I'm looking for? Almost omnipotent. Like it's really, really
He's
hard to kill this guy. Like,
he's super powered. Yeah.
yeah. And
Yeah.
his powers borderline on immortality. Like you literally, there's parts where it's like, oh yeah, you killed him. Oh nope, he's back in his cocoon. He'll be back in about 6 months. Give him some time.
Yeah.
And that's where I have issues with a character like him. He's too overpowered. It's one of those like you're you're almost more overpowered than Superman, because it's like at least Superman in theory could die if we found the right circumstance, but not Adam Warlock. Like he's gonna live. So what they did with his character,
You
I
have
thought
to
was
destroy his cocoon, bro.
pretty much. But then it's like if you can't really destroy, because all it does is he pops out and kills you, and then he's gonna be like a child, which is what they did in this film, and that's what I was kind
Yeah.
of leading into. It's like they comment the cocoon was opened early, you shouldn't have done this, and he acts like a man child, like he's like this hurts, and then he like left. Certain things happen to him. He just seems like a kid, but he reminds me of almost like Goffrey, I think his name was, from Game of Thrones, the little king
Oh, Joffrey.
Joffrey.
Joffrey. Yeah.
And because it's like I have all this power, look at me. Owie, like I got hurt, and that's kind of how he reminded me. And I thought that was a perfect way to represent this character, because he was just born, if you really think about it. So you don't know what he knows. I mean, he's probably at most
Yeah.
3 or 4 years old, essentially. So I think that character was perfect. My problem after watching the film, after I got home and thought about it, was the High Evolutionary.
Okay.
I love what they did, what they told the actor. I don't know his name. What they told him to do.
I'm not gonna try and pronounce it. He's Nigerian.
Oh
He's
yeah,
in
so
the
if you can't
Peacemaker
pronounce it,
series.
if you're out, I'm out.
It's he's got again. I don't know how to pronounce it. Go look it up.
Yeah,
He's
go
a
do
very
that.
good actor. He was Myrn in the Peacemaker series, and I think he does a great job in this
Exactly.
role. But I have some concerns, and interested to find out if they're the same ones you have with that comic knowledge. So what did you
So
not like?
they really redid everything about the High Evolutionary, and since his comic book origins. Originally, he's a geneticist. He basically also kind of worshiped Mr. Sinister, and none of
Okay.
that's talked about.
No, we don't
He
have we don't have any connections to mutants in this movie.
no, and it felt like they were gonna go there because he makes a comment about going to Earth, and I was
Mhm.
like, is he gonna comment that he helped with this? Or nope, nope, nope. He doesn't even. And I was like kind of hoping that there was that little minuscule, like maybe he just name drops Sinister's real name, which I already forgot. I'm not a huge X-Men fan, but it's like,
Oh man, yeah,
yeah,
I'm
see, it's like I was hoping maybe he's like, I met with this guy and he taught me this, and I'm like, that would have been a perfect tie-in to X-Men because you get Mr. Sinister and all this. But his character basically, at the end of the day, that I didn't like, he just had OCD, I feel like. And I felt like that's all it was. He was just so obsessed with one thing, and that kind of pulled
mm,
me back out. But I just wanted to say again, actor, whatever they told you to do, you nailed it. I thought he did a great job. I just don't
yeah.
like after sitting. So I'm moving and I had to come home after the film and I was putting a bed together. I had about an hour and a half of putting minuscule, like, okay, I was kind of thinking about
Mhm.
crap, am I right? And I started looking up some videos on High Evolutionary again, and I'm like, yep, I thought so. As I'm like putting this bed together, I
Yeah,
just that OCD thing really threw me off.
yeah.
What's your concern though? Because I'm a
Nathaniel Essex, by the way, is
there
Mr.
you go,
Sinister.
Nathaniel
Yeah.
Essex. Yep.
Um, so I think my issue with this villain is the same one that I have in a lot of movies, and the most egregious version of this there's actually two. Is
Okay,
the Doctor Doomed version from the 2015 Fantastic Four, and then
that was the reboot,
Apocalypse.
right?
Yes,
Okay.
and then Apocalypse from X-Men Apocalypse, which is where they show off a character, a villain with some incredible, fantastical power that they don't explain. He just can
Exactly.
do something incredible, and
Yep.
then later he just doesn't use that power.
No.
Like when he's they have him show it off against like henchmen or random
Right.
people. Which in Apocalypse it's like he kills people with like sand, just like
Oh,
basically
that's
cutting
right.
their heads off. In Doctor Doom, he's like exploding people's heads. But then
Oh, the
later,
lightning
when
bolts.
they're facing off, when Apocalypse is facing off against the X-Men, he doesn't do that. Or when Doctor Doom is facing off against the Fantastic Four, he doesn't do that. And in this one, the
Right.
High Evolutionary, we see him, we know how overpowered Adam Warlock is. And
Right.
we see him just manhandle him. He's just like,
Right.
like I have more power than you. I have more control than you. And they don't explain how that works. And it's seemingly, I mean, he's just waving his hand
Hmm.
and basically crushing Adam Warlock.
Oh yeah,
And
with no, yeah.
and so like we don't see a weapon, we don't see anything. He's just doing it. And then later in the movie, when he's facing off against the Guardians, we don't really see him do that. We see him like blow up his own control room just by like exploding himself, except
Yeah.
he's fine. Like he doesn't die. And then, I don't understand why he doesn't do those things later in the movie when he's facing off against the Guardians. Like it doesn't really make sense. So that was my issue with him. I will say that I liked the motivation they gave him and where they finally got to, which we will talk about in spoilers. When he finally explains why he's so obsessed, it was like, oh yeah, of course, like that clicked for me. It made sense to me. And so we'll see as we talk about that in spoilers, whether or not that
And
worked
that's
for you as well.
yeah. And that's the
But
funny thing is like you say that and it's yeah. But you're right. Like I think the other problem like they have had with their villains and something that you touched on too, they're all two dimensional though. There was nothing. I want more backstory for some of our villains. Give me a reason to either side with him or not side with him.
Yeah,
Like for me,
we one of the things that we didn't have with him that we get with someone like Thanos or someone like
mhm,
Killmonger is we didn't have a personal motivation for him. Like, why is he so obsessed
exactly.
with this? We understand what he's obsessed with,
Hmm.
and we understand, like, and I don't think this is a spoiler to say he wants to create, a perfect society.
Yeah, that's a
but we don't have a personal connection of like he lost his family to disease
mhm.
or crime or hunger or like something that was like, and he wants to now eradicate the imperfections of society because of the loss or trauma he had. We don't get that, and I think that's the piece we were missing to really understand him from at that level, rather than just say he's a mustache twirling villain
And
who
that's
is evil, which is kind of what he is. And
yeah,
that's okay. Like you can
it
have just
is.
a straight up evil villain, which is what he is. But I did feel like there was that dimension lacking to him, as you mentioned.
Yeah, exactly. And then I mean, like I said, my thing is uh you like you said, you hit it. It's that mustache twirling villain, and his or like I'm trying to think of how to word this too. High Evolutionary has kind of a complicated background. He is a villain at first, but then you find out, like you said, you get that backstory with it, and he's actually becomes a good guy to a good extent. Sorry, my camera's all wonky. Um, so you get a a flip in him, and he's a hero, not a hero.
Mhm.
He's just kind of like there, kind of like the collector and some like the watcher. They just, hey, can you help me out once in a while? I really am not supposed to, but here you go. And he kind of just like, can you help me? Yeah, I don't care what side you're on. Every now and then that little tinkering of like, ooh, I should mess with genetics kicks in, and he may turn a dinosaur into a human for fun. But it's like, we don't get any of that. Like you said, we get no motivation. Like I would
Yeah.
have been okay if they would have just said, "Oh, he just is really obsessed with creating the perfect race or a perfect human," because then that kind of gives you that really evil man that we used to have about 70 years ago before he was murdered himself. Um, you get that person that's like trying to create something, and give me that backstory. Give me that. He is a human actually in the comics, and we don't really get that in this. It's just you assume he's a human, but you don't get it. Like I kind of do miss the iconic outfit with the whole armor he used to wear, but I mean it was like a helmet and
Mhm.
everything because it was like a grand surprise when he took it off. And it's like, oh, this is just a who are you? You're a human. Like what? Where did you come from? And then
Yeah.
you could get that telling. But anyway, but overall,
So
let's so I was gonna
Well,
say
before we get to scores, I just want to say if you're thinking of, taking your kids to see a Guardians movie because it's fun and it's lighthearted and it's got some, good humor and those types of things, there is some creature and body horror in this movie that kind of, lends itself back to James Gunn's origins in kind of horror movies and things like that. That might have some disturbing imagery. So I think that
I'm trying to think
if
which part.
your kid is maybe under like 10 years old, I mean, it's rated PG-13. If your
Yeah,
kid's maybe like under 10 years old or is easily scared of like imagery, and the one thing I mentioned this to another friend of mine who is talking about taking his kids is
yeah,
like, think of like the Dark Knight when you see Two Faces full on face, and it's like, ooh, that's creepy. Like, and we've got
right.
the like half his face is missing, and you see
Oh, I
like
know what part you're thinking of now. Okay,
there
that took me
is
a minute.
yeah, there is some body horror, and then even like again the creatures that rocket. We see some of the experimentation on him and
Right.
some other animals that can be a little disturbing for a younger age, just based on some of the imagery and things like that. So just a word of caution if you're looking to take your kids to this. If they're
It,
if they're scared by that type of imagery, this may not be the movie to take them.
and I will say, I don't know if you caught it. Maybe it's just me. Maybe it's because now Deadpool 3 is coming out. It felt like they really did push the language barrier a little bit in this one.
We did get our first MCU F-bomb,
Yes.
which we've had alluded to. I mean, we had. I am mad that it wasn't Nick Fury getting to say mother effer. Like
Yes. It
that
needed to
should
be
have
Nick
been the first
Fury.
MCU because we almost got it in Infinity War right before he
I
gets blipped. He's
yeah.
about to say it. We get Aunt May, at the end of the first Spider-Man when she discovers that Peter Parker is fighting. She's like, "What the?" And it cuts.
Yeah. And
Um,
it's been
so
cutting.
so we've had a couple of like it's there, but it's not. In this one, we get a
Right.
full on F bomb, which again, I appreciated. But yeah, it did push it a little bit, closer to that R territory. It's still PG-13, but
It
it's
is.
full PG-13 again with a little bit of that creature and body horror and stuff like that. So before we get into spoilers, though, let's just talk about ratings and final thoughts. Aaron, go.
Overall, still a great movie. Overall, still a solid film, I think. I was okay with the way everything wrapped up. I'm okay with how it's. If this was the last time I ever saw the Guardians, I'll be okay with it. I would be not the happiest because I love these characters, but I'd be okay with the way we tied up everything in a nice little bow. Where we had their
Sure.
send off. We're good.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I think we're on the same page with the villain, with High Evolutionary, that he's a good villain. Like the actor did a great job. I'm gonna say that. Like I'm gonna praise the actor. Yeah, if they told him be this mustache twirling villain and he freaking nailed it, I
Mm-hmm.
think he did great. I just don't think the character was done right for its origin and for who he was. So overall, I wanted it, like if you would have asked me right when we left the theater, I would have said, "Oh man, this is up there. This is 8, 8.5, like way up there. Like it's a good film." Sitting down thinking, I'm like, I don't really like that villain as much. I'm gonna come down to like a 7 because I
Okay.
still love. Again, the Easter eggs is what kept me going. And then
Okay.
again, we know I love the space heroes, and I can't wait to get into some of the stuff in the spoiler section of this. But yeah, that's where I'm at. A
Okay.
7. What about you? What did you think?
We're yeah, we're really similar. Again, I thought the humor worked really well in this movie. I thought I was laughing throughout. There were definitely some running jokes and gags that I appreciated. Again, comparing just to Guardians 2, like when they had the running joke of Taserface that just did not
Yeah.
work for me. In this one,
I forgot
there's
about
a
that.
running joke with Cosmo, the
Oh,
Russian space dog, and that totally worked for me. I was like, I am loving this running gag. And I thought it paid off really well. So ultimately, I thought the humor worked. There was still a lot of emotion in this story, but maybe not the final like dagger that you get in the first two movies. So I think maybe I was missing that a little bit.
yeah.
But ultimately, we're really similar. I'm gonna give this a 6.8. I liked it a lot. And I do think it will potentially even get better on rewatches where
Right.
I'll enjoy more, especially if I like watch this as like a trilogy, and maybe throw in some
I don't
scenes
want to
from
sit there
Infinity
every
War
time.
and Endgame, that kind of thing. So yeah, I like this movie. I'm looking forward to talking about it more in spoilers.
Yes. So on that note, if you don't want to see the spoiler, stop here. But